Hello and welcome to video 3 of Life Unlimited, 10 Steps to Real Change. What I'm going to do in this video is just to frame things as far as subsequent videos and also to look at change itself. 10 Steps to Real Change, that's what we're hoping is going to come from these videos. It's what people to come into therapy for, is change, and I think there are some things that is important to hold in mind when we're trying to make changes to make that process easier. So something about change, and then to talk about the first step, which is taking responsibility. So I'm going to end the video talking about that, step 1. So as far as framing what we're doing here, as I've said in the past, by going through dominant threat, by going through dominant reward, you can see that by experiencing them, they lead to a pretty limited life. The way that we experience the world through threat is defensive. So it limits what we believe about ourselves. If you're looking at imposter syndrome, if I don't believe I'm good at my job, for example, I'm going to limit the job possibilities that I go for, the job opportunities that I go for. If I get reactively angry a lot because I'm in dominant threat, it will potentially break up relationships. It may also, dominant threat with fear, keep me in relationships because I fear I don't deserve anything more, but keep me in relationships which are not good for me. So again, it's all ways in which I'm limiting myself. I will limit behaviours. I will limit the things that I believe I can do. I will limit the amount that I trust others. If you're looking at the reward side of things, just having a primary relationship as far as my thoughts, feelings and behaviours with a substance or behaviour is very limiting. My imagination is used just to crave. It's just to think of the next way that I can get that particular thing. Same with imagination in dominant threat. It takes things apart. It argues about things. It is not a place of creativity. And I'm going to come on to, in subsequent videos, talk about creative imagination and how to really encourage that as a way of connecting with self and also others. So threat takes things apart. So there's something that's said about people who are depressed, so that place of dominant threat, I believe, which is they have an inability to construct a future. So you can see how limiting that is. Dominant reward values tend to be about just comparisons with other people. So it's limiting the amount of yourself that you see. It's only a particular aspect of yourself, whether that's status, money, of your physical appearance, that you compare with the status, money, physical appearance of another. So the point being, all limiting. And hopefully what's going to happen throughout these videos for you, by looking at thoughts, feelings, behaviours, body, relationships with others, how you communicate, your boundaries, is it's looking at those things that work well for you. I'll come on to talk about that in change, and replacing the things that don't any longer with things that are much more expansive for you, with beliefs that are going to be about possibility rather than defensiveness, with things that are going to be about realizing your creativity and potential and realizing the greatness of you now, or even the things that are neutral about you now. So what we want is a situation where, rather than being mastered by a particularly dominant threat or dominant reward, we want to be able to take the best of each. So the survival parts of threat, the fun stuff, the goals, the sort of motivating bits of drive, and spend most of our time in connection, so that we're mastered by none, but we get the benefit of all. And that, I believe, when they're working together, we can maintain balance of that calm and alive, and that's the place of a life unlimited. As I've already said, if we're in threat a lot, if we're in reward, what gets depleted is connection. And that's the natural thing that happens for us if we don't consciously and deliberately do something otherwise. So what I'm doing throughout these videos that you'll see is, as well as addressing some of the things that threat does specifically, some of the things that reward does specifically, is to intentionally increase the connection part. Cultivation undoes craving. That's something which I like from the context of addiction, which is that rather than just stopping yourself doing something or saying, I'm doing the wrong thing, I don't want to do that, I don't want to drink anymore, I don't want to take drugs anymore, whatever it might be, but a lot of the attention gets focused on growing new things, planting seeds, watering seeds, new relationships, seeing myself in a different way, creativity. So cultivation undoes craving in the context of addictions. I also believe that cultivation, which I would see as connection with self and others and the world around me, also undoes anxiety, also undoes depression, also undoes chronic anger. So connection, basically, I would say, undoes dominant threat. Connection undoes dominant reward. You can't hold on to connection. You can't be in a place of love with self and others and be in a place of dominant threat and be in that place of dominant reward. It might sound like, because I'm saying that everybody therefore needs to be a particular way based on this, that's not the situation at all. I think what we're trying to distinguish between here is those aspects of your personality which are about who you are congruently and who you want to be, and those aspects that are a result of early trauma, for example, and therefore that place of dominant threat, or how you dealt with it by going for dominant reward. So we are not trying to make everybody the same here. In fact, the more creative you are, the more unique you are compared to others potentially, and the more you're able to express yourself and who you are. So this isn't about making people the same. I know I boil things down to these places of dominant threat, dominant reward and connection, but the idea behind that is once we manage it, once we're in that calm and alive place, then we get to be who we really are. If we believe we're naturally introverted, I meet some people who are introverted, I think, who are actually don't want to be around people because of dominant threat. It makes it difficult to be able to be around people. They get very triggered by them. And actually also introversion is, of course, an authentic experience of some people. But we want to know the difference between the two, that your personality type, that your values, that what you see about yourself and other people is who you uniquely are. And the difference between that and it being the result of early shortage of love or other traumas in life. So hopefully that's what's going to be happening throughout these videos for you. So talking about change, because that's what this is all about, change is not only possible, it's inevitable. So the permanence aspect of dominant threat, the hopelessness, the helplessness, those kind of thoughts lead people to believe that they can't make changes, that this is never going to be different. What I want you to be aware of is that, of course, change is happening all the time. It's happening internally with us, it's happening physically, it's happening to our neural pathways all the time, every moment that passes, happening to everybody around us, the world around us, the seasons changing, the weather changing. So change isn't just possible, it is inevitable. The difficulty, if we're in dominant threat and in dominant reward a lot, or dominant reward a lot, is that those changes tend to be tightening up of fear, reducing life. If you look at being in dominant threat a lot, for example, and anger, that part of it, over time, if I'm very reactive because of anger, that will potentially isolate me from other people, because anger is if I get angry with others, it triggers their threat part and they may avoid me. So if I'm in that part a lot, people might avoid me more, therefore I feel less safe, therefore I feel more anxious, therefore I feel more angry, therefore I am more reactive to people and I separate myself even more. So these changes are going to be happening all the time with dominant reward. The addictions tend to tighten up over time as well, because having a primary relationship with a substance, for example, alcohol, other relationships fall away, people become angry with me, come out of life. Those things increase my anxiety, those things increase my anger, frustration or hopelessness and helplessness, and make it much more likely for me, therefore, to go to the thing which at least temporarily changes my state or relieves some anxiety or helps me to feel alive. So the point I would want you to make is that we are managing change now, change that's going to be happening anyway, but we're going to be in control of it. We're going to be trying to manage it in a way that's going to be helpful to you and is going to help you live a much less limited life, and a life that's going to have more meaning, more purpose, and be more intentional for you. Having said that, we have evolved to repeat patterns as human beings, so change is difficult. These are habits of a lifetime. for a lot of people. For some of you, you may be younger listening to this. For other people, so it may be just a few years that this has been around. But if you're talking about childhood patterns and it's decades after that, those patterns have been the way you've experienced yourself and the world for decades. So change does take time. There can be things, hopefully, that you get from these videos that are sort of light bulb moments. And those changes, therefore, can happen very quickly, can happen in a moment. Often to translate those cognitive changes into changes in behaviour, there's a lag there for people. So have patience with yourself. I think that's the really important thing here. And I'll talk about it in the context of love and connection with self in a subsequent video, and the word compassion. I'll talk about that more there. Some people believe that one of the reasons why it's difficult to make changes for people is that there's a gain for us in being a particular way. You would have thought that being anxious a lot, for example, would not be, because it's so uncomfortable from a feeling point of view, you'd want to change that. There are some that believe that because, say, in anxiety, we might get other people to soothe us, to do things for us, people might come towards us more and help us, that there is a gain that we get from that which reinforces it. I personally don't believe that very much. I think the reason why people have difficulty making changes is just that we're pattern forming, and that the current state of your world reinforces the way that you are. So, as I'll talk about in subsequent videos, in terms of the way that you are, some of those things will work very well for you. Some of those things will be neutral, and some of those things will be difficult for you and unhelpful. If you take the example as far as unhelpful, of having not very clear boundaries, which is often a situation that people are in when dominant threats are around, and also dominant reward. And I'll talk about boundaries in a subsequent video. But if you're in a situation where, because of fear, you haven't put in boundaries in the past, or because of anger, you put in boundaries too reactively and too quickly or too harshly, and go between both, potentially. You know, some people in dominant threat remain in relationships where they should have left a long time ago, but don't because of fear, or they cut too quickly and don't work at relationships. They find it so difficult to tolerate a rupture that they would rather just end the relationship. So when you start to put in boundaries, say no to people, for example, to take care of yourself, some people don't respond well to that. I mean, it is in your best interest, and your primary responsibility is to take care of yourself. And hopefully, most of these changes that you make are going to feel good. But some of them, you'll get a pushback by people. People have known you in a particular way, again, for decades, particularly around boundaries. This happened. So just hold in mind that even if you're making internal changes, which is what a lot of this is around, there might be pushback from other people. Who are trying to keep you in a particular place, not even consciously necessarily. It's just that for you to change in relationship with other people is difficult for them. It might require them to do things differently. So it's not a linear process as well. Please bear that in mind too. You know, we've got particular pathways, and we're going to be looking at them throughout these videos and making them conscious. And what we're doing a lot of the time here is adding new pathways, which I hope you'll find helpful. And you'll get a reward from using and feel the benefit of using. So you'll just rely on them more often because they'll work better for you. So more connection, for example, rather than being avoidant through fear. But that is not going to be a linear process. Those avoidant parts are always, you know, potentially going to be there. Those traumatic memories and the beliefs that we've developed about ourselves and others may still be around. So it's absolutely possible over time to slip back into them. But when that happens for people, they'll often say, "Oh, I've gone back to square one." But it's just not the case at all. Hold in mind that it's not a linear process. That there'll be important changes, as I say, potential epiphanies you might have this afternoon. But it doesn't just go like this for people. Nothing changes if nothing changes. That's the situation where we might think things about ourselves and have this sort of cognitive awareness of things, but not actually do anything differently. So a lot of behaviour does need to be reinforced through behavioural change. It's only through the behavioural change, for example, that we get the benefit of it. We get the reward, and therefore we continue to do that. A rising tide lifts all boats. Small changes in a particular area of life really help the rest. You know, our thoughts, feelings, body behaviour, relationship with self, relationships with others are all interconnected. So if you make a change in one area of life, it's going to have a knock-on effect on other areas of life. So if I'm less impulsive in my home as far as going and getting that piece of food or shopping, if I delay doing that for 20 minutes and I'm growing that buffer between impulsivity and actual behavioural change, that will help me when I'm relating to other people if I want that buffer more there. So I don't want to be as reactive, for example. If I don't listen to the fear and feel the fear and do it anyway, which I'll come on to in my personal life. So I wasn't going to go to that class because I'm anxious about it, and I think, well, I'm going to do it anyway because it's going to be good for me. If I enjoy it, if I get the benefit of that, push that boundary out a bit further as to what I think I can believe, push my tolerance a bit further out, that's going to help me as far as public speaking at work, if that's a difficulty. So all these things are connected to each other, or every little change you make has value. If you're looking at having an extra glass of water a day or sleeping another 10 or 15 minutes, that helps you much more with your calm and alive state, helps your body, which helps your thoughts. So it's all interconnected, all interrelated. As I say, every seemingly small change has significant implications for you, possibly. Please hold on to the fact that we're not making these changes because there's something wrong with you or there's something defective about you. We're making these changes because it's going to be better for you in the future to do that. It's not the place of shame is one of that I'm defective at my core, that I always need to be better, that I'm going to be happy when this happens, that I'll be a good person when this happens. And an amount of these videos, I hope, is really grounding the things that are great and are good and neutral about you now that you wouldn't change, and also perhaps the things around you. With dominant threat, we have a tendency, as I've already said, to find the problems in everything, including ourselves. So a huge part of this is grounding the great things about you now, the unique things about you, your skills, competencies, values, talents, the things that enable you to do the things you do, to do the job that you do, to sustain the relationships that you do. So please don't take this as making changes because there's something wrong with you. We're making changes because it's going to be more helpful for you. Fake it to make it, as I've already just said. There are situations where we're not going to feel like doing this new thing behaviourally, going to this new class or meeting this new person. Because if you particularly use the example of depression, people don't really feel much at all, underwhelmed by feeling. So a lot of what encourages us to do things is feeling, and I'll come on to that: excitement, love, passion, things that motivate us. Fear motivates us well, anger motivates us, but we want to be motivated more often not by those connection feelings like love, passion, joy. And if we're not feeling them, we are unlikely to want to do whatever it is. So sometimes we're going to make behavioural changes, we need to not feel like doing it, but do it anyway. So that's the reason behind fake it to make it. I understand the whole idea of faking something. People don't want to be incongruent, or because actually an amount of dominant threat is being incongruent, not showing who I am because I'm fearful. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is to do something, even though we might not feel like doing it. If you're looking at the Susan Jeffers book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, same sort of principle. Even though we might be fearful of something, even though a dominant threat tells us not to do it, we'll survive even if we don't, which is true, but we won't feel good. But it will say avoid, and even if our brain is telling us to avoid it, even if dominant threat is telling us to avoid it, if we know in theory that this is probably going to be a good thing for us, please try and do it despite the fear part. And if you don't, that's okay too. Again, I'm going to come on to the way to relate to ourselves. If we don't do the things that we want, or we're not able to make the changes that we want that afternoon, or we just choose not to because it's too much for us from an anxiety point of view. The idea behind all this, and an important principle, is not to turn on ourselves for doing that. It's to view ourselves compassionately. We can set boundaries, we can know changes need to be made without turning on ourselves when we don't make them, or we find it difficult to make them. So it's going to be difficult at times. Hold that in mind. Using the example again of boundaries. If I put in boundaries with somebody, they may think that I'm doing something wrong, or get angry, or get tearful. So I might then experience feelings of guilt, regret, fear that they might leave me, whatever it might be, whatever dominant threat might throw up for us. So please hold in mind that as much as we're doing this, and I want you to go through this process because I think it will feel a huge amount better for you in terms of relationship with self and others, there may also be times when you have difficult feelings to manage because of change. I'll talk when we do the video on the guide about mindfulness and meditation and those ways in which we can help ourselves tolerate the things that we think and tolerate the things that we feel. So please always remember through all of this process that it's going to be worth it making these changes. Without knowing what that feels like, it can be very difficult to make changes because we haven't got the benefit of experiencing life in that unlimited way and experiencing ourselves and other people in that unlimited way. We don't know what it feels like. If we did, we would do it. So please hold in mind all the time, I'll hold that for you, that this is going to be worth it for you, and the changes that you're making are going to help you to feel so much better about yourself and others. So moving on just to step one, so beginning with the steps. Step one is about taking responsibility, that you must be the change you want to see in the world. For lots of reasons, dominant threat particularly and dominant reward mean that is difficult. One of the main ones is that if I suggest taking responsibility for someone who has in that dominant threat place and is, for example, arguing a lot with their partner, they will take it as blame, or that they have to take blame, or it has to be their fault. Dominant threat thoughts are binary, as we already said. So it's either you who's in the wrong or I'm who in the wrong. It's a victim-perpetrator thing. So either you're the perpetrator in that situation, or I'm a perpetrator. So it sees things in that way, in that binary way. So words like fault, blame are very much the vocabulary of that threat place. Taking responsibility is absolutely not about taking the blame or it being my fault. What it's about is the fact that we can only change, really, our own thoughts, feelings, body, behaviours, how we relate to other people, how we communicate with others, how we put in boundaries, and all of that I'm going to talk about throughout these videos. That those are the things that we have control over. One of the reasons I think that reinforces that lack of safety place of dominant threat is that we're trying to get other people to make changes in life in order to make us happy. And of course, if other people did, it would. But the difficulty with it is we can't control other people. We must be the change we want to see in the world. So hold that in mind, just revisiting early experience. One of the reasons why taking responsibility is difficult for people is that we grew up, at the most formative years of our lives, we had to hand over responsibility to somebody else. Children are entirely dependent. Of course, growing up is a process of taking back that dependence, ideally. But certainly for years and years, very formative years, what we do, what we think, what's right for us, what isn't for us, our values, what success is about, are all other people's thoughts, beliefs and values. So you can see how we really get into a habit of putting responsibility out there and perhaps being angry about it, but still responsibility for our lives and for us can lie out there. And if caregivers very much reinforce that a dependency, we may then just find a romantic partner who does something very similar, or friends who do something very similar, and continue with that lack of taking responsibility throughout life. Threat and reward, very externally focused, as I've said, about hypervigilance to the environment with threat. With reward, it's about how I can bring in a behaviour or substance or someone to change my state. But we're looking inside now. We're looking, dropping inside rather than thought, behavioural and feeling energy going out to others and what they might do to help me. I mean, it's all going to be a part of life. I'm going to talk about others and how important they are for us and how important they are for this life unlimited. But the first place to start with us is responsibility for ourselves. Being aware of our freedom to control our response our freedom to change our mind, to take care of ourselves, to put in boundaries ourselves, to have a look at the values that we're living with and acting in accordance with, and make sure they're the ones that we want. What does a lack of taking responsibility sound like? I mean, it's very interesting. It can come up very much in people's language. We'll say a lot things like, they made me angry, they wound me up, so they hurt me. And I understand that when somebody says something which is triggering or dysregulating, which triggers that that threat part with anger, for example, that's intrusive and automatic. So I can see that they annoyed me. Using that phrase, that is what's happened. Something has come in intrusively, a word has been said or a look, which has pushed that part forward. I was not intending that to happen. I did not want that to happen. It has pushed forward. So I understand the sort of passivity about somebody made me do that. But we have to realise that at a particular point, and hopefully quite soon after that happens, I then take responsibility for my response to it. Nobody can make me feel bad on a consistent basis. I have to consent to that. So if somebody is demeaning me, is criticising me, that will push that part forward, the threat part, which is protective, completely understandably. It's going to step forward intrusively. But as a pattern of behaviour, if I'm allowing that to happen, remaining in relationship with somebody who's doing that, then I have to realise that I am consenting to it at a particular point. And it's not, again, a fault thing, it's not a blame thing, but it's that if I want something to be different, the only thing that I can do is change my responses and behaviours. So watch when you're talking to other people, and notice when other people are doing it as well, all the kind of made me or annoyed me or wound me up or drove me mad, those kind of things. And again, as I said, we're not making any of those things wrong. That's the binary place of threat. It's just being curious about them, and how in language I might be communicating a sort of passivity in life and an inability to control my responses to things. Can'ts and won'ts, very interesting. A lot of people will say they can't do things, they can't not see their parents at Christmas, they can't stop work and or change career this late in life, whatever it might be. Please try and change can'ts to won'ts. Again, that is not from the point of view of you taking the blame. It's just from the point of view that if you say can't change my career, it stops there. It's like an externally imposed injunction on your life. That is not something that you can do. If you say that's something that I won't do, then you just need to take it a bit further there and explain to yourself why you won't do that. And those reasons may be very helpful for you. There may be good reasons which, when you make them conscious, are, as I say, good and helpful reasons why you won't. Some of those reasons why you won't do things, though, may be as a result of values that have been given to you by other people, that have been imposed on you by caregivers or schools or whatever it might be, that actually don't fit with who you congruently are. So you're living a life in accordance with the can'ts and the shouldn'ts imposed on you by other people, the kind of social norms, or as I say, caregivers, that aren't actually in line with who you are or what you want. And in these videos, who you are and what you want is what it's all going to be about, really getting a grounded sense of that. So watch the can'ts and the shouldn'ts and the ought to's as well. When I say I ought to do this, what tells you you ought to? What's the reason why you ought to do that? And as I say, you may continue to do them for good reason. They may be helpful things to do, but it's all the while, being curious about what's behind things for you. Lucky is an interesting one. Lucky and unlucky. I've already mentioned unlucky in the context of dominant threat. What I would say about lucky is that people will describe their lives and where they are in life and say they're lucky to have it. I know that there's a randomness to life and what we're born into and the people that we meet sometimes. But the difficulty with dominant threat, I think, is that it does not allow us to take responsibility for the great and the good in our lives and who we are. So we might say we're lucky that this has somehow happened randomly by accident. If there are things that are good in your life, that are great in your life and about you, your skills and talents and competencies, you're able to do that, and you have those things because of who you are and because of how you respond to yourself and how you respond to other people. And I'm going to come on to that and hopefully ground those things for you, what you're standing on, the things that you wouldn't change. So if we're using lucky in the context of I'm grateful for those things, then that's great. To be grateful for the things that are in your life, to be grateful of those things about yourself is a very helpful thing psychologically. It's just probably more helpful to use the word grateful than it is lucky, because I just think for me, lucky has connotations of some randomness, forces outside of my control that mean that I'm doing well. Which I don't think is the case most of the time. Actually, the reason that you're doing well at certain things and you've carried on with this, even despite being in dominant threat, or dominant reward, you've managed to achieve all these things and be this person that you are, even despite those things. And that is not because you're lucky, but because of who you are. As far as responsibility, it's just taking responsibility for yourself and your dependents, therefore people who can't take care of themselves, and pets. I don't feel responsible for anyone other than myself, dependents, children. That doesn't mean, of course, I don't help other people, love other people, have interventions if I think that there's something they can't see. Doesn't mean I don't give advice, but there's a difference between doing those things and connection in relationship and being loving in relationship and believing I'm responsible for those people. Those things are different. So I think just try and be curious about the degree of responsibility that you feel for people other than, as I say, yourself and pets and children. So what we're doing from this point on, if there's a difficult situation, we're going to drop inside with curiosity first, rather than going out to somebody else to bend the knee with anger, to yield. I'm going to look internally at the stories that I'm being told by threat, by fear, by anger, and I'm going to question whether they're true or not. I'm going to question whether they're helpful or not in a way that gets annoyed with myself, not in a way that gets frustrated with myself, but just turning inside with curiosity. If I'm taking responsibility, as I say, it's not blame, it's not fault, it's not angry with myself, it's curiosity with myself and how I respond to things and why I reacted that way. And is that reaction the most helpful thing for me to do in that situation? Just to talk about 3 options, I'll mention them again. In any situation, if I'm talking about taking responsibility for myself, I know this might sound a bit simplistic, but 3 different options: accept it, change it, or leave it. So if I'm in a relationship where, for example, somebody is regularly as a pattern of behaviour demeaning me or diminishing me, my choices are to accept it, to change it, or to leave it. So accept it, tolerate it, so continue despite that for whatever reason. Often, if there is a pattern of behaviour in relationship where something like that's happening, I personally don't think that's the most helpful thing for you to do, but some people will tolerate that in other people for whatever reason. But as long as you're consciously making the choice, I think that's fine, because then you haven't got the trapped aspect of it. But accept it, change it. So as far as changing it, we can't change the fact that they're doing it, but what we can do is change ourselves, and that may include telling them, if that's not something that's happened already, that we don't like the behaviour, that it has this effect on us and we would like to do that differently. So we're changing our response to it, if that's something we haven't vocalised before. If what we've done when they've been doing that is sort of smile along because they're laughing or whatever, the thing that we can do is change our response, which is to put in a boundary, which is to say that isn't okay for us. We feel that way when they do that, and could they please stop doing it? So that's the sort of change here. And then we leave it to them. And I will talk about that much more generally in the video on communication, which I do later. And then leave it. So if there's a pattern of behaviour in someone else that I don't like, that is harmful to me psychologically, physically, there is a choice to leave, of course. And again, I will mention that as well in subsequent videos too. So just to finish off, as far as taking responsibility, of course, I am putting these videos out because I think outward in for you, they're going to help you. I am not talking here about the fact that taking responsibility for ourselves means that we don't take the advice or interventions or opinions of other people. It's just that dominant threat leads us to believe that we can't trust ourselves often and that we have to go with the opinions of others, for example, or that the only thing we can do is to trust ourselves and that other people can't help us at all. So it's often that either or. Going out to others in terms of watching videos like this or self-help books, those things are incredibly helpful, I think, as long as we are over time taking in that belief that we can trust ourselves and make good decisions for ourselves and make this life the best that it can be for ourselves. Okay, so next video I'm going to go on to step 2, about what is connection, what is love. If we're going to try and encourage connection, if that's what we're going to be deliberately doing, what is it? So I shall see you there.